Hello. My latest quest, as if you care about this, is how to make user-defined functions that resolve circular references, or that do something very similar, which is developing dynamic goal seeks. By dynamic goal seeks, that's some kind of term that I just kind of made up. That's something where you don't have to press the goal seek button and the goal seek just works automatically in Excel. I'm trying to make these things easier, okay? And I received this email that maybe you're reading. This is so wonderful. If it's not obvious that I have dyslexia, it should be if you've ever watched one of my videos. But this person says, as a person with dyslexia, using video, audio, and examples seem to be the best way. I think there might be a little word missing there, but that's okay. And so here is what I try to do. If you go now, of course, maybe I change this stuff too much, but we kind of, in the project finance progression here, we start with some featured models, then go through how to build the models from A to Z, then go through some advanced subjects that I have to talk about a little more, then go through some circular references, and finally I put the interpolate function, which I think is important, along with the dynamic goal seek function. And then if you go down here into this page, it says it works through some fundamental ideas of using a dynamic goal seek. And it says the first thing you really should do is make a function, and in the function you have to define all the variables you're going to use for the whole thing, anything. You can't use any ranges. And here's the important thing, kind of. When you make a variant, you can make a user-defined function that has more than one output. You would have to press Shift-Control-Enter there. I should have put that maybe as a comment. Then I have a little switch that just exits the function, so you don't have to run the function in case you worry it couldn't slow down. So if this program switch is set to true, false, then it just exits the function. There's my dyslexia. And then this output has 15 rows and 1,000 columns. Way too much. In the old days where you had to worry about it, you don't anymore. And then to start these things, so what I've done here in my dyslexic way of explaining this thing, I've said, okay, let's first describe what's in how to make these functions, and then after describing them, we'll go through some fundamental ideas. A fundamental video, really. It's got that's the last video I made. And then some a little more advanced ideas, and that's what I'm talking about now, and I'm going to add and describe a file, since the very nice person said, well, we need some example files too. So that's what I'm trying to do now. After you have defined the variables, then you need a start, an end, and a loop. Do you see this loop that says, go make the senior debt start at some value, go to an end value, and have an increment. Now, these increments will change all the time. If you start with 0, that might be a good place to start, and then you have to work on how to find a maximum value. That's a little tricky. And then after you do that, you make all the calculations. Now, this is from a different program, but you go, in this case, we said, let's go around from the start date to the end debt with an increment. And then we have we figure out the tenor, and then we have a little loop inside the loop, and inside that loop we compute the debt service each year, and then the period by period DSCR, and we count and we see what the minimum DSCR is. We take the difference and do some other stuff, but that's just showing you you kind of have to redo the calculations that lead to the target variable. Just like in a goal seek, there's a target variable and a changing variable. This target variable is the debt, or in this case, it's the senior debt. And you go around and around and try to, I'm sorry, that's the changing variable, idiots. That's the changing variable. I called myself an idiot. That changes. And then the target variable, you want to find out here, here's the target DSCR here, and you want to evaluate by changing a variable, you want to evaluate the target. That's just a regular old goal seek. And then once you do this, you need some kind of formula here. And the formula says, well, let's compute our minimum DSCR, take the difference, and if the difference is less than 0, that means we've added too much debt. That means let's see, the difference is the minimum is less than our target, so we've gone too far. And when we've gone too far, we go back and restart just by adding the last increment, and then we go to the end one. End one is just the current increment, and then I divide it by 100. I don't know what the theory is behind what this number is. There's probably a really good theory. And then we go to the restart, which is up here, right there. There's the restart, okay? And I've kind of done this a little bit before, and then you test whether you've met the right criteria, and the question is always kind of how small this should be, and then you can go to the output once you get around the loop. You get around the loop and go to the output. Now, the fundamental ideas I've gone through, but here are some more kind of interesting ones. If you have two goal seeks and one is dependent on another, they cannot be in two separate functions. I learned that the hard way. It breaks Excel. If you have a circular reference, and in this case that I'm about to show you, there's an income tax, and the income tax depends on interest, and the interest depends on the goal seek. And you can combine the circular reference and the goal seek fairly easily, but then in the Excel you have to be really careful and use the output, make an output from the dynamic goal seek. Okay, and this kind of says it again. You can put iterations along with the goal seek. Now, I am going to talk a lot about this dreaded hash value. If you have anything like an incorrect array, in other words, a dimensioned variable, or if you didn't define all the variables correctly in the input, or you have a divide by 0, you'll get this horrible value. Okay, and here's how the basic way to get around it is just keep putting an exit function. I'm going to show you that in a minute. And then here, I finally think displaying a lot of variables is a really good thing to do. So here's what I'm going to open this file. This file is called Complex Dynamic Goal Seek. And this is not a ideally set up model. It's kind of an annual model, and a lot of it's in Dutch, and I was just helping somebody out a little bit. But as the first thing, there were things I had to fix. One of the things was we start with turnover or some kind of revenues, operating cost, OPEX, and then get the working capital and the CapEx so you can get the project IRR. Once you have the project IRR, get the after-tax IRR, then put the sources and uses. This was interesting. They had some crowdfunding. That was kind of, I never thought that was real, but apparently you really get it. But it only financed the construction period, so they had to refinance after construction. And the big question is how much debt can be put in on a long-term basis, and the debt is driven by the DSCR, but the debt has a level repayment. Okay, so over here, after the first period, we repay this debt over a level amount. So what the really nice person I was working with wanted to do is to say, he first wanted to say, look, I can go and negotiate with my EPC contractor. But when I negotiate, I want to make a goal seek. Now, this is a standard goal seek, okay? But the key thing about this goal seek is that when you change the CapEx, that changes the depreciation and all that. And you're going to, with a different CapEx, get a different debt amount for various different reasons, including the ones I just said. So if, and we want to see, well, okay, let's say I put a 1 point, this is great, I'm a real idiot. I should have had fixed debt off. Excuse me for that. So if we put 1.4, 1.4, then we get a certain IRR, and in this case the IRR goes up, 1.3, 1.3, come on, and then the 1.2, the IRR on the equity is going up, but we can then put this is just a regular old macro with a regular old goal seek, nothing fancy there. We do a goal seek on the CapEx to see how much CapEx we can afford. And if we have a 1.3 times 1.3 times DSCR, now our IRR goes down, and let's put it back up to, I suppose I should have put a little target there, but so you don't have to press it up and down. So now the CapEx, I hope, went down. Let's put 1.5. Okay, and let's go down and then up. And it kind of shows what the CapEx have to be. Now once you have, so this all works with the dynamic goal seek. And if you didn't have the dynamic goal seek, you'd have to get into this business of running one goal seek, running another goal seek, trying to get it to converge, doing it kind of manually, and it would be a really pain. Now, when you do this, DSCR, when you back into the DSCR, by the way, the taxes are a big deal. If I put zero tax rate in here, we get a different IRR, and we can then also add another goal seek that does the same sort of thing for a sub-debt. Now, when you use the sub-debt, you better use the total DSCR, not an incremental DSCR. It's the total DSCR. And if I have 15 years, you can see, well, what happens to the amount of sub-debt we use, okay? Or you can switch this off, okay? I hope my hope is that you're saying, you want to use that dynamic goal seek. If I've got a model and I'm really doing some analysis, I want to use this. What happens if I make this 17 years? Then it goes up, and then you can, when you go back and discuss the CapEx. That took a little bit longer to run. When you discuss the CapEx, you can see, well, now I can put more CapEx in because I have a longer thing, and I had no debt. If I put some sub debt in, then how much you can see the CapEx that you need again. So those are the kind of things you can do. Of course, you can just input the CapEx as well. All right? And I'm going to turn off the sub-debt and put the tax rate back. Okay? Now, this is the challenge. When you would work on a goal seek, the problem is that there would be a circular reference around with a goal seek, and then you would have to put some kind of copy and paste and go around the goal seek. It would be a real pain. So relatively, these are not in millions or anything or thousands. These are in euros. So it's a small project, but it was a pain. It was a pain because of this. Here is the minimum goal. Here's the minimum one. We could put a conditional formatting or something. So we didn't include this first part here in the minimum. We just did it here. So we get the minimum, but to get the minimum, you need the cash flow available for debt service. But the cash flow available for debt service is affected by the taxes, and the taxes are all the way down on the profit and loss statement. They even have a little increment. Okay, and then here is the really big thing about it. Well, I hope you do a nice looking cash flow waterfall. This had a cash sweep in it as well. But to get this all to work, I suggest putting a whole, these are all outputs. This function is now really big. Okay, this is the function. If I press F2 and then Shift F3, it's going to go through all the kind of things we need. We need the targets, and it shows the amounts. That was, again, remember what I did? I pressed F2 to show the function and then Shift F3. I need for the taxes, I need the depreciation, I put a little program switch, we need the target DSCRs, we need the interest rates, we need all of that stuff, and certainly we need the time switches. Okay, so let's just take a brief peek at this function, alternate F8, and we'll go through, and it's got something called dynamic goal seek. So I just am posting this so you can look at it. And a lot of this stuff I just showed you. The first thing we have is the dimensions of all the output variables. You need to, all of these variables that you want to put year by year, column by column. And then there's some starting and ending values that I'm going to go through again and again and again, but this allows you to select a whole row or a whole column. It's essential, and that's what I'm trying to put in a whole bunch of kind of templates that can help you out, hopefully. And then we put our starting points. We say, let's start at 0, and then go up to the maximum debt, and the maximum debt, let's just add up all the EBITDA and say that's a really big number. And then we make an iteration around the whole dynamic goal seek because the taxes, and if we look in the model, the taxes are here, taxes from the function, and then I said, well, let's also take the taxes from the P&L, let's make them the same, but then when you do to make sure you don't have this horrible circular reference associated with taxes, when you put your taxes in, this 451, just press Control and go down, that and then F5 and back. Let's do that again. Control and square bracket and F5 and go back. That comes from the function. It doesn't come from the P&L. That's like a copy and paste. So in your goal seek, now you can put a circular reference resolution. That's really what I did. I kind of might have not done it perfectly here. But then we go around the senior debt around and around, and a lot of this stuff over here is just outputs. That's just outputs. The only hard part is coming up with what's the balance, and then I put the taxes here again. So that's why I was saying kind of the taxes are here. The reason you need the taxes twice is the junior interest expense or the sub-interest expense you don't have yet, and you have to keep in an array, and you have to kind of go around it. That's the only reason for the iteration. And then you do the same process. You've got to do the same thing, and then you do all your tests for the thing. This is all way too long, I'm sorry, but it's a very similar process for the sub-debt, and you have to compute the taxes again and the CFADS and get the minimum total, not the incremental, the minimum total DSCR, figure out what the sub-debt is, and then you put all your outputs together. And that's it. So that's an example. I don't know if this is going to help you. For me, this would be too complicated. For me, kind of taking this model and maybe playing with it a little bit might be useful just to see why you want to do this sort of thing. And you might get a couple of ideas out of it. That's what, somebody told me receiving I'd rather be sitting on a bed of nails. I'd rather be sitting on a bed of nails than looking at somebody's model. But sometimes you can steal ideas from the models. Now, this is one you might want to sit on a bed of nails instead of looking at this model, but hopefully just by messing around with it, you might get some ideas from it. So then I might think, well, what's better than receiving a model and taking a model and having a nice glass of wine and just reviewing it? And that's the end of my video. Sorry for blabbing.